If you're just joining us now and haven't watched the first part of this absolutely terrifying story, pause this video right now and go back to watch the previous episode. Seriously, because what you're about to discover simply won't make complete sense without the devastating context of what Davis and Martinez witnessed that night at Fort Huachuca. For those who've been with us from the start, welcome back. You already know what happened. Two trained U.S. Army soldiers on a routine night patrol watched an elderly man physically transform into a gigantic rabbit with human eyes right before their very eyes. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, moments later, that same man mysteriously reappeared on the outside of the fence in a physically impossible location. Now, let's find out what happened in the minutes, hours, and years following that encounter that would completely change these men's lives forever. What they were witnessing was impossible according to any known law of physics, biology, or reality as we understand it. Martinez finally broke the sepulchral silence that had settled between them. His voice came out mechanical, flat, as if his brain was desperately trying to force some rational logic onto something that completely defied any possible logical explanation. "This isn't possible. It just can't be real," he murmured, more to himself than to Davis. "I know it shouldn't be possible," Davis replied, his voice tense, tight with adrenaline and fear coursing through his veins. "We just saw that man. We saw it with our own eyes. I know that perfectly well." Davis realized at that moment that he'd been holding his breath throughout that entire impossible, surreal sequence. He exhaled forcefully, the air escaping his lungs in a trembling, completely irregular breath that revealed his deep, traumatic state of shock. "What the absolute hell was that we just witnessed with our own eyes?" His voice came out broken, hoarse, laden with disbelief. "I have no idea, man. Honestly, I have no explanation whatsoever to process this." Martinez swept the beam of his flashlight over the exact area where the elderly man had been standing just moments before. His desperate eyes searched for any evidence, any physical proof, but he found only completely empty desert, randomly scattered creosote bushes, rocks, and loose stones on the arid ground. Absolutely nothing beyond the normal desert landscape. No trace, no footprints, no tangible physical evidence that something extraordinary and impossible had just manifested in that exact spot. "We both just saw exactly the same thing?" Davis asked, his voice laden with desperate urgency. He needed external confirmation, needed to know he wasn't having a complete mental breakdown. "Yes, the exact same thing. Every microscopic detail. So we're not going crazy or having shared hallucinations. I saw it all too. I witnessed every second of it. The transformation, the human eyes on that creature. Everything." Martinez lowered his flashlight gradually, as if the weight of what they'd just witnessed was physically pressing his arms down. His hand was shaking so violently that the beam of light jumped and danced erratically across the desert floor, creating ghostly shadows that moved frantically. He began speaking in a distant, disturbed voice, as if accessing old memories he'd deliberately buried in his mind. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about things exactly like this when I was little, growing up near the reservation." His voice grew lower, almost reverent. "He's Navajo, you know, pure blood, and he always spoke with extreme seriousness about these entities, beings that could change shape, that walked between the human world and something beyond." Martinez stopped abruptly mid-sentence, as if uttering the full words could somehow invoke or attract exactly what they were trying not to name directly. "Man, I always thought they were just folk tales made up to scare little kids and keep them behaved. Stories passed down from generation to generation, you know how it is. Legends to explain things ancient people didn't understand before modern science." Davis stared at him fixedly in the darkness, waiting for him to complete the obvious thought hanging in the air between them like toxic smoke. But they weren't just stories, were they? Davis concluded the dark thought both were avoiding fully verbalizing. "No," Martinez replied, his voice barely above a whisper laden with growing terror. "I don't think they were stories at all." Davis's radio crackled again with harsh static, breaking the tense, suffocating moment of shared revelation. Sergeant Hayes' voice cut through the night over the device. "Patrol 2, backup is approaching your position from the west. Flash your lights so we can locate you visually." Davis raised his flashlight with a still visibly trembling hand and pointed it back toward the dirt road they'd come from. He flashed the beam 3 times in quick succession, creating the standard identification signal. A few tense seconds later, another flashlight beam appeared in the dark distance, swaying rhythmically as someone walked toward their position. "What are we going to tell them?" Martinez asked quietly, his voice laden with genuine concern and fear of the consequences. About what we really saw here? Davis hesitated, his brain working quickly through the limited options available. The full truth, I suppose. What else can we do? They're going to think we're completely insane. They'll send us straight for psychiatric evaluation. Maybe, probably. But what alternative do we have? Lie about what we witnessed? Two soldiers emerged from the absolute darkness, their silhouettes gradually materializing in the dim light. Sergeant Hayes and Specialist Thompson from another patrol team assigned that night. Hayes was in his late 20s, a career non-commissioned officer with visible experience, his face possessing that worn, hardened quality that clearly indicated multiple deployments to combat zones over the years. Thompson was younger, more physically robust, with a permanent expression of moderate boredom stamped on his face, that look that comes from pulling too many repetitive guard shifts. "What's the exact situation here?" Hayes asked with professional authority as soon as they got close enough. Davis opened his mouth to respond, closed it again without making a sound, then tried once more, struggling to find the right words. "We, had an intruder, an elderly man. He was standing over there by the fence, maybe 50 meters from checkpoint Delta 7. Where is he now at this moment?" Hayes asked directly, his eyes already scanning the surrounding area for potential threats. "He left. Disappeared." "Left to where specifically?" "He ran east initially, along the fence line." Technically, it wasn't a complete lie. The creature, the gigantic rabbit, had indeed gone in that direction. Davis just couldn't force himself to explain the rest of the impossible details at that moment. His mouth simply refused to form the words. Hayes swept his flashlight over the surrounding area with professional, practiced movements. "Did you see which exact direction he went?" "East along the fence line, but then—" Davis hesitated visibly, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. Martinez was looking at him with wide eyes, silently pleading through his gaze for him not to say anything that would make them sound completely insane. But screw it all. Both had seen it happen. They'd witnessed it with total clarity and awareness. "Listen, Sergeant. Something really strange happened here. Something extremely bizarre and out of the ordinary." Hayes' expression gradually shifted from genuine professional concern to moderate, weary annoyance, as if he already knew he was about to hear something problematic. "Strange in what specific way?" "The guy, he wasn't normal. He wasn't an ordinary person. Was he armed? Did he pose an active danger?" "No, not in that conventional way. It's just that—" Davis struggled desperately to find words that conveyed the insanity of what he'd witnessed without sounding completely crazy. "He was just standing there, completely motionless, not responding when we shouted commands at him. And then he changed physically." Thompson let out a sarcastic, scoffing sound. "Changed what exactly? Changed his mind about trespassing on military property?" "No, he changed his entire body, physically transformed." Davis could hear how absolutely insane this sounded, even as the words left his mouth. "Look, I know it's going to sound completely crazy, but he turned into a rabbit. A gigantic, enormous rabbit. And then he ran away at impossible speed. And after that, he was standing outside the fence, as if he'd never been inside the restricted area in the first place, like he'd teleported instantly." A heavy, uncomfortable silence descended over the group like a suffocating shroud. Hayes and Thompson simply stared at Davis and Martinez with expressions mixing total disbelief and growing concern. Thompson's expression had quickly changed from bored to genuinely amused, a smile starting to form at the corners of his mouth. Hayes just looked deeply tired, as if this was yet another complicated problem on an already long night. "A rabbit," Hayes repeated slowly, his voice deliberately neutral and controlled. "Yes, Sergeant. A giant rabbit, you said. Like about 4 feet tall?" "Correct, Sergeant." "I see." Hayes pulled his own radio from his belt with a practiced motion. "Patrol 4 to base. We have a situation at Delta 7. I'm going to need to bring these 2 soldiers in for immediate medical evaluation." "Wait, no, Sergeant." Davis began to protest with growing urgency. "Medical evaluation?" Martinez's voice cracked with obvious panic. "Sergeant, we're not drunk or on drugs. We don't use substances. We both saw exactly the same thing with perfect mental clarity. That's exactly what concerns me deeply," Hayes said dryly. "You two just told me you observed an elderly citizen magically transform into a giant rabbit and then teleport outside a fence. That's not how it sounds. That's literally what you just verbally reported." Thompson was smiling openly now, barely containing his obvious amusement. "Man, I really wish I'd been on this particular patrol. Sounds way more interesting and exciting than mine was." "Shut up, Thompson." Hayes ordered sharply. Hayes turned back to Davis with a hard professional expression. Here's exactly what's going to happen now. You two are coming back to the patrol base with us immediately. We're going to file an official report about a possible intruder in the area. We're going to log everything properly per protocol, and then you're going to rest and recover your mental faculties. And we're not going to mention absolutely anything about magic rabbits, supernatural transformations, or any other X-Files stuff. Is that clear? But Sergeant, Davis tried to argue. Is that clear? Hayes repeated in a harder voice, making it absolutely clear that it wasn't a suggestion, but a direct order. Davis's jaw tightened visibly with frustration and impotent anger. Clear, Sergeant. Excellent. They walked back together, the four forming a tense and silent group, following the dirt road toward the patrol base at the edge of the training area. No one spoke much during the trek. Thompson kept glancing at Davis and Martinez with poorly suppressed amusement shining in his eyes, clearly finding the whole situation hilarious. Hayes maintained his rigid professional demeanor, but Davis could tell the sergeant thought both of them had completely lost their minds. When they finally reached the patrol base, a small concrete block building equipped with a radio station and an old coffee maker, Hayes made them sit in uncomfortable folding chairs while he began meticulously filling out an incident report. He kept the details intentionally vague and sanitized. 2 soldiers on routine patrol reported observing an elderly male intruder near checkpoint Delta 7. The individual fled the area before backup arrived on scene. Physical description: white or Hispanic male, approximately 70-75 years old, thin build, wearing dark pants and light-colored shirt. No further contact established with subject. No mention of the impossible transformation. No mention of the gigantic rabbit with human eyes. No mention of the inexplicable reappearance outside the fence, defying all known laws of physics. That's not what really happened, Martinez said quietly, his voice laden with frustration and despair. Hayes didn't look up from his bureaucratic paperwork. This is what I'm logging officially in the system, unless you want me to write that you both hallucinated a giant magic rabbit, in which case you'll spend tomorrow talking extensively with behavioral health personnel and probably being removed from operational duties. The choice is entirely yours, gentlemen. Martinez slumped heavily back in his chair with defeated resignation. Fine. Understood. Wise and mature decision. Hayes signed the form with a final pen stroke and filed it in the appropriate folder. You two are relieved from patrol for the rest of the night. Head back to your barracks, get some proper sleep, and tomorrow we'll pretend this never happened. Understood? They left the patrol base together, walking in heavy, laden silence through the dark base toward their barracks. The moon had risen in the sky while they were dealing with the bureaucracy, a waning crescent that provided just enough light to see the path ahead. Somewhere in the vast distance, a coyote howled into the night. The sound made both soldiers flinch involuntarily, their nerves already completely frayed. You believe me, right? Martinez asked when they were halfway back, his voice vulnerable and needy. You saw it all too? I saw exactly what you saw, Davis confirmed firmly. So what the hell was that? What did we encounter out there? Davis didn't answer immediately. He was thinking intensely about the elderly man's smile, that impossible and unnatural smile. Thinking about the way his body had convulsed and changed in a way that violated all known biology. Thinking about the distinctly human eyes set in that impossible rabbit face. Thinking about the incomprehensible teleportation outside the fence. My mother's side of the family comes from New Mexico, he said finally, his voice thoughtful and distant. We're not Navajo proper, but we grew up in the surrounding areas near the nation. And there were always specific stories circulating, you know? Things you didn't talk about openly, especially not with outsiders. Entities that walked at night. Beings that could physically change shape. Skinwalkers, Martinez said the word quietly, almost a reverent and fearful whisper. Yes, exactly that. But I always imagined they were just old folk tales. Cultural narratives to explain phenomena people didn't understand before we had modern science and proper education. But you saw it happen. You witnessed it with your own trained eyes. I know that perfectly well. We both saw it. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I know that too. They reached their barracks building. The lights were off in most of the windows along the hallway. All the other soldiers were sleeping soundly, completely oblivious to what had happened that night in the desert. Davis pulled out his access card to unlock the entrance door, then stopped with his hand on the handle, turning to face Martinez directly. Martinez, listen carefully. We can't talk about this to absolutely anyone else. Do you understand completely? Yes. Hayes is right about the consequences. If we start telling people we witnessed something supernaturally transforming, we'll end up in mandatory psychiatric evaluation or worse. People will think we're making up stories for attention or that we had mental breakdowns. Martinez nodded slowly, processing the grim reality of the situation. So we just pretend it never happened? Bury it completely? I don't know what other viable alternative we have right now. They entered the silent building. Davis went to his individual room, stripped off his uniform with mechanical, automatic movements, and lay down on his narrow bed. He didn't expect to sleep at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that elderly man's face, that horrible and impossible smile, the way his body had twisted and transformed into something that absolutely shouldn't exist in our plane of reality. But eventually, physical and mental exhaustion overpowered his hyperactive and terrified mind. He fell asleep sometime around 4 a.m, slipping into a restless, disturbing sleep. He dreamed extensively about the desert that night, about walking through infinite expanses of scrub brush and sand, while something followed him always just out of direct sight. Every time he turned quickly to look, there was absolutely nothing visible there, but he could feel that presence watching intensely, could hear its breathing, low and hoarse like wind blowing through a deep, ancient cave. In the terrifying dream, he finally stopped walking completely and turned to face it. The elderly man was standing just 10 feet away from him, smiling that impossible and disturbing smile. And behind the elderly man, dozens of other figures materialized in the darkness, hundreds of them, all standing in absolute silence, all watching fixedly, all smiling in exactly the same unnatural and terrifying way. Davis woke at 6 a.m. to his shrill alarm, completely drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding violently against his ribs as if trying to escape his chest. He sat up abruptly and put his head in his hands, desperately trying to shake off the visceral nightmare still pulsing in his mind. 3 months after that life-changing incident, Davis officially requested a transfer to another base. He never told anyone the real reason behind the decision, but according to his own account given years later, he simply couldn't stay at Fort Huachuca anymore. The training areas felt fundamentally wrong now, contaminated. Every night patrol felt like tempting fate again. He kept expecting to see that elderly man again, standing there by the fence, waiting patiently for him in the darkness. Martinez stayed at the base for another full year, until his enlistment officially ended. But he never pulled perimeter security again, managing to get assigned to motor pool work, anything that kept him away from those remote areas after dark. The truth about that night stayed buried in sanitized reports and traumatized memories, but what they saw remains unexplained to this day. And this is just the first layer of the mystery, because they weren't the only ones, not by a long shot. Prepare yourself to discover the other encounters the Army never wanted you to know about.